Middleton. Giannis trailing the lob. Oh! Run, 2-on-1. Green the finish. Wow, the alley-oop. LeBron turned the corner. Inside! He made Yusuf Nurkic's screensaver. Here comes Murray. Alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
All right, joined now by Anthony Irwin, host of Lakers Lounge. Anthony, thank you so much for hopping on. Really appreciate you taking the time. Let's talk about the Lakers. Let's talk about a team where the record has been fine. I wouldn't say it's spectacular. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's just kind of a B or maybe a B minus at this stage of the season. Just, I know it feels worse than expected right now, especially after the loss in Philly. You were talking about this before with me. It's the worst loss of LeBron's career from a point perspective, 44 points. What happened? Just tell me about what happened.
Well, a lot, so the game starts out, the Lakers are like relatively competitive. They're kind of hanging in there. I was kind of curious how AD was going to handle that game, seeing as Paul Reed, of all people, was firing shots at him, calling him a flopper and stuff while he plays on Joel Embiid's team. And I was like curious, like how that was going to look. And, AD starts out the game 8 points right off the bat, in the first quarter. A few jumpers in there, but it looked good, looked engaged, and I was, ready for a really fun game, it looked like. And then the Sixers go on like an 8-0 run. You figure, well, surely they'll call a timeout. Nope. They extend that to like a 12-2 run. Well, surely now, right? You got to call a timeout. You're going to call. Nope. 16-2 run. All right. A timeout is coming, right? Like, Darvin, take your hands out of your pockets, call timeout, see how it goes. You don't even need if you want to keep your hands nice and warm and cozy in your pockets, you can keep them in there and yell at the referee timeout. Like, that's also an option. You can do that too. Nope, no timeout. It got to a 20-2 run. And finally a timeout was called, but it was because it was an under 3-minute TV timeout. So and then it just wasn't particularly competitive from there. The Lakers had their opportunities. I thought Joel Embiid picked up 2 early first quarter fouls, and the Lakers just stopped attacking him. It was just kind of a mess of a game, and I think pretty indicative of a lot of what's ailed them this season. I know it's a weighted term, but they're a very entitled bunch coming into this year, where I think they thought coming into the season, because all they experienced last year together as a core was an incredible run through the end of the year, and then a run all the way to the Western Conference Finals. And I thought, I think that the organization basically thought, we'll just bring that back. Everybody comes back. Everything will be hunky-dory next year. And to a certain extent, against bad teams, that's been the case. But against good or engaged good teams, that has not been particularly pretty.
Yeah, that's usually the mark, right? Like, it's usually if your starters are going against other teams' starters and they're good starters and they're always losing their minutes, then that's generally not a great indication of a good basketball team, a great basketball team. And I know that that's always the goal with Los Angeles. That's always you're never going to be satisfied for goodness. Like, that's not how this market works. So I was surprised that Austin Reaves was benched early on this year. That was something that, kind of on the outside looking in, that was not something that I really expected to happen. He was obviously talked as way better than that, somebody who could be a part of a big three. For those that have not paid close enough attention, why did Austin Reaves get moved to the bench, and is it working?
So I'll answer the first part first. Essentially, D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reaves and LeBron James were all reluctant to step on each other's toes while they were out there together. And you kind of expect that to a certain extent, right? They are three kind of ball heavy type players. They, Austin and D'Lo can't really coexist in sets, right? One guy, you can coexist with LeBron. You can run pick and roll with LeBron, and you can run pick and roll with AD. But those two guys don't really get involved in their sets very much. And to start the season, um, on top of all of like the conditioning stuff and some of the fatigue that Austin and every other player who played in FIBA this summer was dealing with, it really looked like Austin. Like I don't know if you ever like have danced or paid attention to dancing or anything like that,
I
but
dabble.
but like you know how essentially like if you go to like a country bar and there's a line dance out there. There are the people who like know the dance, just boom, 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 and they do their twirls and stuff, and they add to it and stuff as they can because they know they understand the dance that well. But then there are also the people who are there for the first time, who haven't danced that stuff before, haven't really heard that music even before in some cases, and you watch them, they're like watching everybody around them, and they're trying to number their steps and stay with the rhythm of the song. And really that's what the Lakers offense looked like while D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reaves were out there together, where they were like, every time they were doing something, they were looking over at the other, like, should I be here? Should I attack here? Should I pull this out and try to facilitate and set up the offense? And for Austin, he is very much, he's in the second year of his career, right? He is very much, or second or third, I forget. He's old for the amount of experience he has in the NBA. He is very much an attacking type player. The game looks best when he is just focused on attacking, getting the defense on their heels, and then facilitating once he has wider open passing lanes and stuff. And so essentially what the Lakers did in moving him to the bench was get him off of the floor with D'Angelo Russell a little bit more so that he could just, and then also play him against bench units so he could just attack. And he could just, approach the game as an attacker and handle things that way. And I would say that it has worked. He has looked a lot better. D'Angelo Russell has looked a lot better. A couple hiccups here and there along the way, as you would expect. But that move, while I understand why it was kind of surprising, I thought maybe if they would split them up, that D'Lo would move to the bench, mostly because I anticipate Russell eventually to be traded. And that way, whenever you trade him, Austin just remains your starting point guard, and it's easier to find a facilitator for the second unit. But they chose to go with Austin, in part because D'Lo was playing better. And like you said, it's just a continuation of an okay season to this point.
Yeah, I wonder if there's not ego's probably the wrong word here, but just like pedigree where you have been starting, you have been an all-star before, and like it's just probably easier to put somebody like Austin on the bench as opposed to D'Lo, and like maybe that'll change. And I think they see Austin as a pretty malleable guy in general, so he's more so happy to be there as opposed to somebody like D'Lo, who I think probably has some expectations here.
I'm pretty well connected as it pertains to Austin Reaves, and when I asked around, how's he taking it, how's he feel about this or whatever, everybody I spoke to said that he was fine with it. He got it. Now it's just time to win back. The thing with moves like that is you better win, right? Like the problem when the Lakers moved Russell Westbrook to the bench was that the Lakers weren't still winning after they did it. And so he's sitting there saying like, all right, I did the sacrifice and we still suck. So when are we changing it back? And in this case, the Lakers have at least stayed afloat.
Yeah, and it makes sense. They are still in a pretty good place. Like 11 and 8 is still fine. There's no problem there. Now, LeBron and AD have played 18 of those 19 games each, and I think that's something that we talked about at the beginning of the year. Like, is the regular season workload going to be a concern? Is it going to be something where, hey, you got to make sure that those guys are healthy and ready for the playoffs? They have played a lot of time so far. Just have you noticed any concerns at this point early on in the season, or are you still kind of waiting for that?
I mean, the minutes load is not great, and the burden that both of those guys have to carry on both ends of the court. LeBron, basically when LeBron isn't on the court, the offense falls off of a cliff, and the offense is already pretty bad even when he's out there. The offense is really kind of concerning. Like if I was trying to tell the story of the first half of the season, I tweeted out these numbers the other day. I'll pull them up again, but the Lakers so far this season are only 10th in free throw attempts per 100 possessions. Last year when they went on their crazy run, right, everybody was pointing it out. They had an insane they were not just first, but they were lapping teams, right? They were almost like zeroth in terms of
if it existed, they would be zeroth. That's for sure.
So they were shooting a crazy number of free throws, and that helps make up for some of the 3-pointers that they aren't attempting. But and so when they fall back to the pack there, it highlights again the Lakers again this season are 30th in 3-pointers attempted per 100 possessions, and they're 28th, I believe, in 3-point percentage. So you're already fighting the math with those two, the combinations of those three stats. The way that you could combat that stat is get yourself some extra possessions, right, through offensive rebounds or not turning the ball over. Problem is they're turning the ball over the 8th most in the league with 15 turnovers a game, and they're only grabbing 8 offensive rebounds per 100 possessions. That is, I believe, 29th for the rest of the. So if you were to try to isolate why the Lakers are struggling, it's that combination of those 4 stats, and it's really basically that simple. The fact that they have been able to stay afloat and sit at 11-8 as they are that bad in those regards is a little shocking, and I think really a testament to how great AD is defensively and how great LeBron can be in close games and stuff. But and the way that they've beaten up on bad teams. So, those stats are going to have to change if they're going to be a serious contender this year.
Getting back Jared Vanderbilt will help there. He's a hustle guy, an offensive rebounding guy, somebody who probably alleviates some of the pressure on AD and LeBron in the front court for sure. And then getting back Gabe Vincent, somebody who they really counted on, and he's played 4 games. He hasn't been good in the games that he did play, but hopefully you could start to see some turnaround there, right?
I was making a face there because I just don't know when they'll get Gabe back. He has what's called a bone effusion, which is essentially swelling of the bone. And my wife is a physical therapist. And I, from time to time, I'll ask her about an injury that the Lakers are dealing with, right? And I told her that one of the guys is dealing with a bone effusion. And she goes, "Oh, God." And when I got that response,
not exactly the response you're looking for in those situations.
Imagine talking to your doctor and tell him what all's going on. And your doctor comes back with, "Oh," that's. So essentially, with this bone effusion thing, the bone swells up, and it's a result of a contusion. It's some type of impact that took place. So it swells up the bone. So once the bone shrinks down, and it's really difficult to shrink down, to get that swelling out of the bone, you still are going to deal with a contusion, right? The initial bruise that led to the swelling. And that can be kind of tricky depending on the amount of blood flow to the area. So when the Lakers say, he'll be reevaluated in 2 to 4 weeks or something like that, this is essentially what went on with Kendrick Nunn, where he had a contusion, and they were like, "All right, we'll reevaluate him in a month." Month would go by. We'll reevaluate him in another month. Month would go by. And then eventually, the reevaluations just stopped. They just Kendrick is, he's over there somewhere. And I'm hoping that isn't what this becomes here with Gabe, but it's a very tricky injury that he's dealing with and coming back from it. And, kind of have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, to your point, Jared will help with the offensive rebounding. The Lakers also, to this point, I just recorded with Aaron Larsoul, who does All Access Lakers, and we do that together. He was basically saying that the coaching staff has basically told the Lakers, "Hey, don't push up on the glass because our transition defense has been terrible." And part of that actually is because of your dude Jokic. he realized AD takes his time getting back on defense sometimes. So the way that I'm actually going to attack him is get out in transition, get as many guys out in front of AD as we possibly can, and pick apart the Lakers when AD isn't anchoring the defense. And the rest of the league looked at that and was like, ooh, that sounds like fun. And everybody is doing that now to the Lakers. So it's going to be interesting here. The back and forth that I had with Aaron is like, you still need to create those extra possessions to offset some of those offensive issues that they've had so far, even if it comes at the cost of some transition points every so often. So I'm really curious what that balance is going to look like when Vando comes back, hopefully after this current road trip.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody like a Nikola Jokic is running in transition, Jared Vanderbilt's obviously not going to help that much when he's out there, but it might help against a lot of guys, and especially your standard centers that are trying to do the same thing in those cases. So, look, I do think that Vanderbilt's a good player. I think he's not a great player, but he's somebody who fits into the ecosystem, does his job, and sometimes when you're the Lakers, if you miss a guy like Gabe Vincent, if you miss some other guys that aren't necessarily playing great, it's just about getting another body in there that you're familiar with that knows what they're doing. So hopefully that kind of rounds them into form a little bit on that end. Last thing I have for you, group play stage. Did you enjoy it kind of as an NBA fan and covering the Lakers, and can this team win it all?
I would like the whole in-season tournament so much more if it wasn't for the courts. It's so hard for me to get by the courts, But in terms of I just feel like if you were a fan of the tournament coming into the game, I think it was a lot easier to identify, boy, golly, these guys are playing so much harder. To which I would say, close games existed in the regular season before the in-season tournament, right? So I think I guess ratings were up for those games, and I think that is the exact kind of thing that the league is looking for heading into their next media deal. Certainly a bit of a red flag that Mark Cuban sold the Mavericks before the next media deal. That was kind of interesting to me. That kind of flew below the radar.
If anybody is going to be kind of a red flag in that situation, it's probably the business guy, like that guy. Yeah,
that struck me as a little interesting, but. I think, for the most part, it's a fun little wrinkle. It's a new thing for fans to kind of, get involved with and get interested in. And I'm really curious how now the knockout stage are going to go. Unfortunately for the Lakers, their reward for winning their group is another game against the effing Suns. So fantastic. All this in-season tournament has done for the Lakers is an extra game against a top 5 team in the league. And if they win that one and win another one beyond that one, they might have to play an extra game for LeBron and Anthony Davis that they're probably going to care about with $500K on the line. So for me, just being a basketball purist and somebody who's just focused on what can the Lakers do to win a championship, I'm sitting here yeah, I guess we'll have fun, but please, dear God, do not get hurt.
So just humor me. Was there only 3 games scheduled initially for against the Suns and the Lakers, between those teams on the schedule, or is this now a 5th game that they're going to play?
Yeah, it's
huh. All right.
Yeah, I saw Nuggets fans getting kind of annoyed because they have to play the Blazer, or no, who was it? The Clippers.
It's the Rockets and the Clippers. They're playing them 7 times in the first 23 games.
Yeah, I would happily trade. Give me one of those games against either of those teams, and I will give you this game against Phoenix.
You know what? I do like to complain. That's my jam. So if I did have to face this, if the Nuggets had to face the Suns, I'd probably complain about that too. So
yeah,
totally understand. Hey, we'll see what happens. I know they'll be very competitive. That should be a fun one to track for sure. But he is Anthony Irwin, host of Lakers Lounge. Anthony, thank you so much for hopping in with me here, man. 6 weeks from now, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on kicking off this project.
All right, joining me now, the newest correspondent for the Golden State Warriors, Natalie Esquire of NBC Sports. Really excited to be able to get to work with you, Nat. She's the producer for Brother from Another on Peacock. You can stream it there. For those that are confused, CJ Holmes just moved to go cover the Brooklyn Nets over in New York. So as much as we love him here, he'll be back. He'll be back to cover some stuff for the Alley-Oop again. But Natalie is going to be taking over for our Golden State correspondents here. And I'm so excited to have her. Nat, thank you so much for joining. Let's talk Golden State Warriors, shall we?
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Ryan. Hopefully I can ingratiate myself with Denver Nuggets fans and they can gain some new perspectives on me.
I love it. No, they're gonna learn. They're gonna learn that you're more than just the like the old Jokic takes back from 2019. Like we don't even have to worry about those anymore. Like this is a new day. We're gonna evolve, and as most people seem to do. We talked about that before. Let's talk about the Warriors, though, who I think might be evolving in the wrong direction. They're the 8-10 record, 14th best offensive rating on cleaning the glass, 15th defensive rating, 16th net rating. They're kind of average. Like this is just kind of like an average team right now. Steph is great, but he's just one guy. I'm very curious as to where you think that consistent help is going to come from now that it seems like Klay might be on the downslope here.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And I feel like for the Warriors, not saying you, but in general, I've seen things like, is the dynasty over? And I feel like this question is asked like every other day about the Warriors. I don't think a declaration can be made like that until after this year. Even when they lost last year, I'm like, one loss doesn't mean that it's over. But the Warriors are frustrating, but I still don't think it's as dire as some are making it seem. So the help will come from Klay. It'll come from Andrew Wiggins. Unfortunately, sadly, they just started off slow or in a slump, however you want to look at it, which is not that unique for Klay Thompson. He's had times where he started off slow and then he gets going. But with Andrew Wiggins, it was just like abysmal. You know, I wasn't worried that he would start to come back because you actually was seeing the progression. So he just had a great game the other night. But like at first it was the shooting, it was everything. But then like you start to see he was starting to be more aggressive. His defense was getting better. So you kind of was seeing it like go in that direction. But, you know, like many NBA fans, people just look at your output. And so like they weren't seeing the points. They weren't seeing, you know, so to me, you know, I think you're going to get what you get from Wiggs. I think you're going to get what you get from Klay. I think the issue with Klay often is just that people have what the old Klay Thompson was. He's not that same Klay Thompson, but he can still be a very effective difference maker on this team. And he's also just effective and important because of how he's guarded, because he's Klay Thompson, right? And so he does create space on the floor. He does help. And we still need him. But I don't think, and this is valid, that there is a go-to number two on the Warriors. Some nights it's Klay Thompson, some nights it's Andrew Wiggins, some nights it's Draymond Green, and some nights it's our bench. And that's just how it is. And I think that makes people uncomfortable when it's like you know, not a single person that they can point to and look to, you know? And I just think this question is also interesting because like if we would have asked this 6 or 7 games in, we would have said the Warriors are great. They're off to a great start, right? So it was like they started, technically they really did start great, on the road great at that, having the second toughest schedule by strength of schedule standards. And then they went home and they did this like really bizarre thing and they lost like most of their games at home. Draymond Green has missed 7 games. So that's almost half their games. I just need people to remember that. Steph Curry missed a couple of games in there. Gary Payton II missed a couple of games in there. So when people assess the Warriors, I get it. You can only assess what their record is. But there are things that happen that have affected them. And this team is different from past years in that one person missing does make a difference. And if something like is going to be a downfall for the Warriors, it's going to be about their health, which I think was always a big risk factor coming in. Like they truly, for the most part, need most of their pieces and definitely their key pieces playing. So I think they've shown us moments that they can be really good. And I think the team we saw for those first 6 to 7 games, I do think those are the true Warriors. I think they have a very small margin for error this year, very small margin, and everything has to go perfect. And that's not always the case. So it's to be determined. I'm not as confident as I've been in past years, but I do think they are a team that can contend, but things really have to go their way.
Yeah, and it's that margin that I think is giving me a lot of pause, that gives me a lot of concern about them as a team now, where usually it was strength in numbers. It was, hey, the next man up in the rotation is going to fill exactly the role as that this other person filled. And a lot of it was based off the fact that Klay was Klay, that Draymond was the peak level of his powers, and he still has his moments, and those guys are still going to have their moments, but it's less frequent. And I think that in general, that puts a lot of strain on the depth, where now you need guys like Gary Payton II and Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins, and all three of them are out for this next game that we're recording this on Thursday before this Thursday night game where all those guys are out. So who can the Warriors turn to then? Who are the Warriors going to be relying on in these cases to provide that strength in numbers mentality?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say for the record, strength in numbers, when that term really got coined in 2016, that was always a myth anyway. The Warriors, that was a slogan for but it wasn't real. They were never deep. You got they went 7 deep, like Sean Livingston, and after that, if you come on, what are we doing here? Some of the players, go back into Michael McAdoo. Who are we talking about? You probably don't even remember his name. So I'm not trying to be funny. Maybe you could argue Barboza. There were some guys, but they Mo Buckets, come on, really. They weren't that.
Love me some Mo Spates back in the day, though. That was
him,
always fun.
Yeah, it was a bit of a myth, right? The Warriors that right now, preseason when I did my previews for the team, I said the Warriors' strength this year really actually is their depth, right? So where teams have higher end talent, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that outside of Steph that we have that higher end talent. Most other teams that contend have a number 2 that's better than anybody who we consider a number 2 on the Warriors. But where our team is different this year is in that bench depth. They have extended the leads multiple times. They're winning the non-Steph minutes. Even when Kevin Durant was here, that did not happen with the Warriors. Those are really great things. And our bench is beating other benches, right? So the issue is really Steve Kerr. It's not that we don't have the bench and the depth. It's his unwillingness to rely on those players, right? He, the other night, took Moses Moody out when he was shooting 100%. He had hit 3 threes or 4 he had 3 threes, and I think he had a dunk. But he also had 2 shots that got waved off. It was all net, right? And he just took them out the game because he wanted to rely on his veterans. His words, not my words. And then he later, the next day, came back and said, that wasn't my best coaching, and I really shouldn't have done that. So I think it's going to force his hand a little bit. I hate that GP2 is injured. Love that the update came that it's not really a tear, but a strain. So I think that might change the timetable and the trajectory. But I feel like that has to force his hand to rely on a Moses Moody a little bit more, who has actually been excellent. And the additional is going to come from the bench. The youth movement this year is more equipped to really do what the Warriors couldn't achieve last year. Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, year 3. You have Sarge, who's there, who is giving us some really good minutes if he's utilized correctly. You have Pods. There's just so many players that on a given night from our bench that are really strong. Even Trace, that can actually help this team. And it's leaning into that. This team was actually constructed to lean into the youth. Steve Kerr has to wrap his mind around it, because this core, they no longer can just turn it on and off. Stephen Curry can, but the rest cannot. And so they have to lean into that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see whether they're going to be able to do it, because I'm not going to lie, Nat, I think the Golden State Warriors might be cooked. And I think that there are reasons to question. There are reasons to believe it. But you seem to think that I'm wrong. You seem to think that there are at least reasons to believe that they are not cooked. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong for your position. I think that's a lot of people's position. I just think obviously, just like I am a fan of the teams. I want to make that clear. So, someone might just say like, "Oh, Nat, you're biased. It's your own bias," or whatever the case may be. But I watch the team. I know them. I know the ins and outs, and so I just feel like they have shown markers at different points this season of a good team. Like, you don't go and win all those games on the road the way you did. That's not a fluke. And the Warriors have always been a team that could win on the road. So last year was an outlier, but that's not a fluke. And they should not have blown a 24-point lead to the Kings. But the point is, like, you're not able to build a 24-point lead to begin with if you're not a good team, right? So there's things that they need to fix. And I'm sorry, but I think I can trust Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green to figure out how to get back to closing games. Like, they've done it for years. So these are just not things to me that are unfixable. There's nothing that I've seen that's an issue that's unfixable, but I do think that they have to start fixing it soon. I don't like if we're in the new year, if we're in another 20, 10, 15, 20 more games and it's still like this, then yeah, I'm going to be saying a different story. But to me, they're at a point now where they do have to rectify it. They do have to change it. They do have to get it together. And I think when you hear Steve Kerr coming on the record and saying what he did, I should not have taken Moses out. When you have Stephen Curry saying like Draymond picked up, I don't know if he said stupid or dumb, and I don't want to misquote him, but it was one of those two. But basically calling him out for that foul that he picked up, and then also having Steve Kerr, to me, that's a signal that, okay, they're talking to Draymond and they're saying, cut the antics because we need you. And they do need Draymond. And when you speak about Klay earlier and even Andrew Wiggins, a lot of people don't realize they're play finishers. So having Draymond Green on the court is really important, right? Because he often sets those guys up. He often looks for them, right? And so it's not that Steph can't set them up, but when he's not there and there's no other ball handler, because then you're putting Chris Paul out there and it's two really short guys. When you put them in that position, all teams are going to do is load up on Steph, right? And then that makes it harder for their offense to work the way it is because it's predicated on Steph creating all these open looks based on his movement, right? And so Draymond really puts the team at a disadvantage when he's not there and he gets himself suspended, right? And I think part of the reason you saw them up by 24 versus the Kings the other night is because you had all five playing together. And we really haven't had that for most of the games this season. So I think I think they can contend. And I think they can turn it around. It does have to start now. But I understand why people are skeptical. You are what your record says you are until you prove otherwise. So no, I'm not like going to sit here and say people are just like crazy bashing them. I think your opinion's totally fair.
Completely valid. Completely interesting. This is never going to not be an interesting team for those reasons. And you have this dynasty that has been going on for as long as it has. And seeing this part of it is always fascinating and can be a little bit sickening at times if you're expecting 60 wins and 65 wins and things like that. But no, it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here and how this team continues to evolve. Last thing I have for you: group play in season tournament. Were you a fan? Were you interested?
Yes and no. I mean, I didn't see why it was needed. I still don't know that I'm convinced it was needed. But like, I think enough of the players are excited about it. And I do think it made for some good games, right? And so anything that does that and enhances the product, right, can only, in my opinion, be a good thing. But I think until it like establishes the cachet, and I don't know if that's what they're going for right now, it's still hard to really care about much besides a championship. And that could just me being the spoiled Warriors fan, but like it's like, okay, all right, they're not in the in-season tournament. Oh well, you guys are knocked out. We're knocked out. Like some of the teams that people expect to contend are not there, right? And some are, but some are not. So it's just like the Denver Nuggets are the reigning champs and they're not in it. Like,
Right.
you know, so
Yeah.
Do we care? Do we not care? You know, some of the MVP candidates. So like Luka, the Mavs, they're not in it, you know? So it's just like, I don't know how much it really matters to me. I'm not against it. You know, at first I really questioned it. I wouldn't say that I'm against it now, but I'm not like so much like, man, this in-season tournament, man, like gotta have it. You know, I thought people overreacted a bit to the courts. I'm like, it's not that deep. I mean, I thought that, oh, it's so awful, my eyes. I'm like, all right, y'all are just, it's a bit hyperbolic. But you know, I think for the players who can benefit from it, right? I'm not saying that like the money is not good, but I think there's some players that it really helps them in that way. And so whoever ends up being the victor and like that extra money that's going to them that can help, I think that's all a positive thing. And like I said, if it helps the product in any way, then I don't see how that can be a bad thing.
Right. No, I firmly agree with you. And we'll see what the payoff is like. This is one thing that I think we haven't seen this aspect of it yet. What happens when these 8 teams are now down into this bracket? And so I'm looking forward to seeing what that actually looks like and whether everybody is as amped for it as people seem to be at this stage. So we'll see where it evolves. But she is Natalie Esquire of NBC Sports. Nat, thank you so much for hopping on with me. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. How about we talk about the Warriors in 6 weeks, all right?
Sounds good. I appreciate you having me, Ryan. Take care.
Joining me now, Brenden Nunes with SacTown 1140 and the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, thank you so much for hopping on. Let's talk some Kings. Let's talk De'Aaron Fox a little bit. He's been a lot of fun. Back in the lineup, did the team pass the test while he was gone?
No, not really. You know, they had 2 really bad games, to be honest, against Houston that were pretty tough. But they found a way to work it out a little bit. I think that they did okay. It was a process for sure. You know, their big things are physicality, pace, and togetherness. And I think that the middle one is what's really missing when you don't have De'Aaron Fox, right? Like a big part of the reason they emphasize pace so much is that De'Aaron is probably the fastest player in the league with the ball in his hands. So I think that their offensive identity really struggled without De'Aaron, but they started to figure it out a little bit. And, you know, I think it's kind of typical. Any team that's missing their best player is going to go through some struggles, a little bit of your identity is missing when that guy is lacking. And I think that's exactly been the case with De'Aaron Fox because he's been I think a superstar this year. He's been phenomenal. He's taken his game to another level from the step that we already saw him take last year that was progress when it comes to the trajectory of his career. So they didn't do great in his absence, but I think they stayed afloat. You know, they're still sitting at 10-7, which is a good spot to be at, advancing in the in-season tournament for what that's worth. So I think that they definitely had some rough spots, but they stayed afloat. And I think that's all you can ask when you're missing your best player.
Oh, for sure. And like 21st in net rating isn't great, especially at this stage. There's some crooked losses in there that I think have really shifted those numbers. These are on cleaning the glass. 13th in offense. That's almost entirely attributed to the time that Fox missed. I looked at the numbers with him on the court. He looks great. Like the team looks great when he's out there. 20th in defense is also a little bit of a slight improvement, which is good to see. You want to see that slight progress, if anything. But I still want you to cook here. I want you to tell the world how great De'Aaron Fox is.
Dude, he has been ridiculous. Like, I already think that De'Aaron Fox has been a phenomenal player, but it's been on another level this season. I think the 3 big improvements have been his 3-point shot, where he's putting up 8.5 a game. and knocking down 36.3%. 8.5 is a ginormous jump for De'Aaron. I got to pull up these previous numbers to make sure I'm getting them exactly right here. But last year it's 5 a game, and his previous career high was 2 years prior, 5.5, 8.5. Like, he is getting the shots up. And I think there is an aspect of, you don't love every one that he puts up because his best shot is always going to be at the rim or at the mid range. Those are his 2 elite areas. And I think this is just part of the process, though, that you need to gain the respect from the outside to unlock the rest of your game. So while sometimes it might be viewed as settling a little bit, I think there's progress there, and I think it's encouraging. And like I said, I think this is part of the process. I think the couple of bad ones throughout the course of the game will relax a little bit. And outside of the 3-point shot, I think it's been consistency, clutch player of the year last year, but a lot of that came with turning it on in the second half. And I believed that there was an aspect of he needed to get his other teammates involved because he's one of those elite players that can just flip a switch and turn it on in the fourth quarter. And not everybody can do that on a team. So you need to make sure other guys are in a rhythm to be able to step up with you in those clutch moments. But I think that De'Aaron has been doing it consistently throughout the course of the game. You look at this back-to-back they just had against the Warriors and then the Clippers. He played 77 total minutes in those games and put up 69 points. Like, second night of a back-to-back after he played 40 minutes, you played 37 and put up 40 points. That's superstar stuff. That's exactly what you want from a guy like that. And then I also think defensively, Coach Brown really talked about after that Golden State game that in the second half, he's switching between Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, which, says a little something about Draymond Green, I will say. But I think that De'Aaron has been phenomenal in those 3 aspects, and that's where we've seen the big improvement in the 3-point shot, the consistency on a night-to-night basis, but really in the first and second halves, it all being there, and then the defensive end. I really think that he's flirting with first-team All-NBA. He's averaging 30.7. That's 4th in the league. Like, the way that people were talking about Shea last year and his rise, I really think De'Aaron is right there.
He's right there. And we've seen a lot of these young point guards step into, I think, the new era of the NBA and really flourish in the space that they're getting. The athleticism, the dynamic shooting off the dribble has been something that De'Aaron Fox, as you mentioned, like that's what makes him special. Is teams have to respect the speed. They now have to respect the 3-point shot. And when you're pulling this defense into multiple different directions, that mid-range then becomes wide open, and he's become automatic with that jumper too. So that has really helped for sure.
I don't mean to interrupt, sorry, but for the first time, from what I remember, which it's only been about 3 years for me, I wasn't exactly the very, very beginning of De'Aaron's career when it came to covering the Kings. But the first time since I remember past 3 to 5 years against Dallas, where he was also just absolutely cooking them, Derrick Jones Jr. is guarding him, and he started going over screens. And I was like, whoa, I don't think I've seen that for De'Aaron before. And that gives him the opportunity to get downhill and get exactly to those shots you were talking about. But the fact that I saw that coverage, I was like, this is different.
It's new. It's the new age of De'Aaron Fox leading the Sacramento Kings to new heights. It's been very cool to see. Unfortunately, who's not really leading to new heights right now is Keegan Murray, who I clearly jinxed when I decided, you know what, I'm going to pick him for most improved player. I think he's going to be the guy who becomes the most improved player this year. We had a nice conversation about him, and the shooting has been slow with him, but I think the defense has still been pretty good. What are your Keegan Murray thoughts just as he's been injured over the course of this last week or so?
Yeah, I think it's been easy to look at those numbers where he went from 45% from the field last year to 39 so far this year. Again, 13 games, right? 41% from 3 last year, 28.7 this year. Like, those are going to go up. He's an elite 3-point shooter. I don't think last year was an outlier. I think we saw that during his time at Iowa. Like, he is a legitimate 3-point shooter, and I think that's going to go up. But I do think that we've seen progress in a handful of different areas. Defensively, he's getting put on Anthony Edwards. There's times he's getting put on Steph Curry or Donovan Mitchell, and then also asked us guard some of these bigger wings like a LeBron James. And I do think it somewhat speaks to Sacramento's lack of options when it comes to guarding those sort of guys, but it's been great to see Keegan take on that challenge, and he looks like he's moving a lot better defensively. I think that's where we've seen the most progress from him. In the offseason, De'Aaron Fox and him have a really good relationship, and he spent a lot of time working with De'Aaron, including playing one-on-ones with him. And we just talked about how quick and dynamic De'Aaron is off the bounce as one of these guards in the league. And when Keegan is getting all of those reps guarding De'Aaron, I think that's done tremendous help for him when it comes to his perimeter containment throughout the course of this season. He looks totally engaged and just really weirdly looks more fluid, like in a way that you don't typically expect development to happen within players. He's been moving great defensively. I think he's bought into the rebounding. He's up to 6.2 from 4.6 last year. Small stuff like connective passing, tertiary playmaking, right? Just making the quicker right read. 2 assists this year from the 1.2. So I think there's been notable progress in those 3 aspects, and I trust that the shot's going to fall eventually, and I do think they go hand in hand. I think all the defensive effort that's gone in there is probably affecting his legs a little bit on the offensive end as well. But again, I think it's going to come around, and I do think there's been notable progress.
No, I do think that in the situation that Sacramento's currently in, he has had to bear a pretty heavy burden. He's a guy who defends a player like Kawhi Leonard, and when he wasn't there in this last matchup against the Clippers, that can certainly bear some ill in that particular side. So he's carrying a heavy burden, especially for a young player. So hopefully, like as he continues to grow into that, there should be no questions there. Like it's just gonna fit right in as the 3rd best player on a team like this, maybe even better, especially down the line. Have your preseason opinions on the team changed at all? Is there anything that you thought would happen that hasn't happened, or is there anything that now excites you when you feared it before?
I think it's been about the same. Like the team has the same overall strengths and weaknesses of last season. I think that offensively, sometimes they haven't looked quite the same as last year. They're also missing a lot of good looks from 3, and that'll even out over time. They have shooters. Kevin Huerter is going to shoot better throughout the course of the year. Keegan Murray, as we just mentioned, is not shooting 28% from 3 all year long. He's going to flirt with 40% throughout the course of this year. I feel pretty confident with that. And I think offensively, they will find their rhythm again. And I think they've started to. They had a couple rough games. And like you said, in the sample size we're talking about, a couple rough games really skews the numbers, right? So I think offensively, they're going to be fine. And it's about the same. Defensively, I will say, I think there's been more bright spots. And they still have plenty of duds. But I think there was like a 3-game sample where that second game in New Orleans, the first one they played, second night of a back-to-back, 4th game of a road trip, was a tough one. They got totally smacked. The next night, they come back, and Zion Williamson has been ridiculously good, by the way. He gets left whenever he wants, and there's no team that can do anything to stop them, but specifically the Sacramento Kings, who struggled defensively, as I just mentioned. But bad defensive first half. Second half, they lock in. They gave themselves an opportunity to win that game, even though they didn't come out on top. I think you saw the same thing in Minnesota, that big in-season tournament game that they won. First half defense, not great. Second half, they lock in and look better. And then the exact same thing against the Warriors, although it might be more of like a 4th quarter thing. First 3 quarters, the Warriors score over 30. 4th quarter, big, I believe, 24-point comeback for the Kings. Golden State only scores 19 in that final quarter. So I think there's been more examples of good defense than there was last year, but they still are not rare, but the more expected and typical look for them defensively is struggling. But I think there have been more encouraging moments compared to last year where it's like 1 every 5 games you'd get a quarter where you're like, hey, that was something. I think you've seen it more this year, but overall, I do think it's the same. They're good enough offensively to win any night, and honestly, I think they're bad enough defensively to lose any night, which is what I said for most of last year, I will admit.
Completely fair. And when you don't necessarily change a ton of the rotation, when you don't change a ton of the personnel, it's not really a surprise. It's just about tightening some things up. It's tightening some loose ends in some ways. And I know you talked about the team wanting to be more physical, and they seem to have applied that in some ways, but there's only so much that will ultimately change just in the grand scheme of things. But there's a part of it mentally where you start winning these close games. You've got a guy in the clutch that you really trust, and you know how to win a little bit better, especially after going through this for a couple of years. So it's going to be interesting to track this throughout the season. I'm curious to see where their defense goes, whether it sticks at around 20th, if it rises, if it falls. Wouldn't surprise me for either. But I'll probably just say it stays about the same. Have you enjoyed the group play stage for the in-season tournament, and now that the Kings are onto the bracket?
I have, and I think I have a unique perspective, but my take on the in-season tournament is there's no real downside, right? Like, obviously I've enjoyed it because the Kings are 4-0 and
Insane.
all of these games have mattered. They're the one of only two teams in the West to go 4-0 in these games, them and the Lakers, who took the 1 and the 2 seed, obviously Sacramento sitting there at the 2. So I think it's been great. Like, playing the Warriors will always have some added juice in Golden One Center. You know, the geographical proximity plays a factor here, obviously, going against them in the postseason last year, and sort of the stuff with Draymond just returning, and after what happened between Draymond and Domas, there was always going to be energy in the building. But that atmosphere was phenomenal, and I think that a lot of it had to do with the in-season tournament, and I think we've seen the players buy in. You know, after I saw Steph win, I think it was their first in-season tournament game, I believe they played against OKC, and then he's talking about this is the first step on the road to Vegas. It's like, okay, if the players buy in, this is going to be fun. And from Sacramento's perspective, they have. Domantas Sabonis, you know, obviously European. It's talked about how these mid-season tournaments are very typical in Europe, and he likes the idea. And De'Aaron Fox has come out and said there will only ever be one first in-season tournament winner. And he related it to the Clutch Player of the Year that he won last year. He will forever in history be the first player to win the Clutch Player of the Year. And nobody can ever take that from you. And years down the line, if the NBA keeps it up, which is what I would expect, that will mean something. And I think there's value in that. I think they care. And even if they play it down as one of 82, because there still is that aspect, like as much as that Warriors game was in season tournament, they're also trying to even their season series because they were down 0-2. They're worried about playoff seeding when it comes to the actual main NBA championship, right? Everything plays a part here, but I do think it's added something, and the players seem to care. And I think that's all it really takes for this to matter. There's no downside. If you lose your first couple, then you go on as if this doesn't exist, if that's what you choose, and it's like nothing changed. But you win a couple and you're in an opportunity to have some pretty fun and exciting games, and maybe you win the first one ever, and there only can be one.
Well, you know who I would pick to be the first ever in-season tournament champion is the Los Angeles Lakers, and LeBron James as the final MVP of that part. No, it's
fitting.
That is definitely on their mind. That's definitely something that everybody is kind of thinking about over there. So you guys have your work cut out for you in Vegas, but I'm hopefully you get there. Hopefully, and I'm rooting for you guys for sure. That is going to be a very, very fun environment, and the Kings are made for it. De'Aaron Fox seems like he's made for it, and I think that this is going to be a very interesting kind of quarterfinal, semifinal, final. So hopefully it goes well, dude.
Yeah, it's high in the sky, right? But if Indiana and Sacramento face off in the finals, the storylines between these two teams would be crazy. Now, both of these teams making it, Sacramento and Indiana, is a long shot. But single elimination basketball, you never know. And it stands out to me that Woj is tweeting out, this is the Elite Eight, and then he posts the picture of the current bracket, or De'Aaron Fox refers to, like, we want to get to the Final Four of the in-season tournament. This sounds like March Madness to me.
It does. It very much does. It's
there's
it's a
the
cool
infamous
thing,
clip. There's the infamous clip of De'Aaron being totally heartbroken, crying after they lost to, I believe it was UNC, and I don't remember, Elite Eight or Final Four or whatever it is. Like, this is fun, and I think they bought in. and I've very much enjoyed it.
We will see what happens. I am looking forward to it for sure. He is Brenden Nunes of SacTown 1140 and the King's Pulse podcast. Brenden, thank you so much for joining me, man. Let's talk again in 6 weeks, all right?
Sounds good. Appreciate you, Ryan.
All right, joined now by Robert Flom. He's of 213 Hoops, host of the Lob the Jam, the podcast. Really appreciate you hopping on, Robert. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's talk Clippers. Let's talk about a team that's been a little bit frustrating for a lot of folks, I have to imagine, and a little bit frustrating for Clippers fans, I'm sure. Are you enjoying the James Harden experience yet?
No, but less because of James Harden than I think because of the roster construction and some of the other stuff going on with the Clippers. By and large, I think Harden has been pretty good. How much you enjoy watching James Harden play, mileage may vary. Most people, I don't think, are particularly fans of watching him play. But he has been good. He's been effective. The Clippers' new starting lineup with him, Terrence Mann, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Ivica Zubac has been very, very good. The issue is more the Clippers' other lineups and the Clippers' other players, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So a mixed bag. Harden himself, I think, has been fine. The Clippers as a whole have some issues to work out.
Well, it's funny because I was going to ask you, I think, a fairly inflammatory question. Can the James Harden trade be called the biggest failure of the Steve Ballmer era? That was what I was on my docket, and I don't think that I can really answer that. I can really ask that now if you think it's actually turning out to be way better than expected.
I'm not sure if it's better than expected. I mean, I think there have been a lot of failures. So it's hard to stack up one against the other. I think we really need to see it play out a little bit more. I mean, we're still really, really early into it. In terms of enjoyment, it has been, I would say, a failure. You know, as I said, like the actual watching experience has not been great, even though the results the past, couple weeks have been fine. I mean, there are so many other failures. I mean, if I had to say the biggest failure of the Steve Ballmer year, it has to be drafting. The drafting has just been putrid. And it's a big reason why they don't have a lot of talent now in their depth. Because, the James Harden trade, they traded away these veterans. Nick Batum and Robert Covington have been great for the Sixers. PJ Tucker has been abysmal for the Clippers. And that's actually been a big reason for their struggles. But if they would have some young guys, on their bench, maybe it would look better. If they don't, that's probably the biggest failure of the Ballmer era to me is the drafting. Wait and see on Harden.
8-9 record, 2-7 in clutch games. I was looking at the cleaning the glass stats. Like they're 8th in point differential on cleaning the glass, 17th in offensive rating, 4th in defensive rating. The defense has been really good. Can you explain the clutch games thing to me? Because that I think has been surprising. Like how could they be that bad when the games get that close?
I think there are a couple things. One is literally until yesterday when Kawhi Leonard eviscerated the Sacramento Kings, who were without Keegan Murray, who's probably their best cover on him. Kawhi Leonard had not been having a great year. Like he wasn't bad. He hasn't been bad by any means. I mean, when you look at his numbers, they're pretty good. He just hasn't had many signature Kawhi Leonard games, and that has been true in the clutch. I think some of it is, despite all of the jokes, he has played in every game this season. He has been playing back-to-backs. The Clippers are in their first 5 and 7 of the season, I believe, tonight. And it looks like he and Paul George and Russell Westbrook and James Harden are going to play. And to be frank, he is not used to that. I think there are some issues with legs on his jumper, and you do see those more at the end of games. I think also, with the Harden trade, the biggest issue has really been figuring out the totem pole and who gets shots when, who gets the ball when. And I think that has played a factor. Harden, if anything, has been too passive. We always think of Harden from his Houston days taking 1 million shots with a usage rate of, 50% or whatever it was. That has really not been him on the Clippers. If anything, he's been too differential. So I think that's part of it. Their best player has not been great at the end of games. And also there's just been this kind of back and forth on who gets the ball, how much, who gets shots. Is it like a Harden-led offense? Is it a Kawhi Leonard and Paul George ISO offense? How much is Russell Westbrook involved, etc.?
Is that something that can be solved over the period of a regular season and just you get into the flow of things, you understand what guys want to do, when they want to do it, can understand rotation patterns and things like that? It does seem like that might be one of the benefits of trading for Harden early on, because then you kind of work out these kinks in November as opposed to working them out in March.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we may have talked about this in our first check-in, but that is why I was in favor of doing the James Harden trade early. There was some thinking that, if you wait, maybe you can get him for less value, but then you would have, each day, each game is less time that you have to integrate a really major piece. So having that additional time to work out the kinks in the regular season, maybe you blow the in-season tournament, but it's okay. It is what it is. I think that's worth it, even if they paid a higher price. And actually, the way the Sixers season has gone, the price probably wouldn't have come down at all because Tyrese Maxey is better than James Harden. And Daryl Morey, I think, would have been very comfortable waiting to get as much as he would have wanted. So all in all, I think it may have, whether it actually works out in the aggregate, I don't know. But I do think the Clippers will have time to figure it out. And I think even though they did pay a lot to get James Harden, I think making the trade early is probably the only way it will have a chance of working.
Okay, so let's talk about this now. Clippers are on their steps to recovery now. They've played better outside of the Reggie Jackson, DeAndre Jordan experience. It seems like everything else has been pretty good. What are some of those other steps that they can kind of take to recover now in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is there are other new pieces that needed to be integrated. The first few games after the trade, they did not really have a backup center. Mason Plumlee was injured almost immediately, and they decided to just play small ball, play PJ Tucker at center. Those lineups predictably did not work. They signed Daniel Tice off a buyout, and he has been quite good for the Clippers as a backup. And that has helped, but he's somebody who needs to be integrated into the team. The first couple games, he was also just kind of playing off veteran instinct. And there's also, guys like Kobe Brown, who has surpassed PJ Tucker in the rotation. Kobe Brown, probably not familiar to a lot of people. He was the 30th pick in this draft, an older rookie. He played over PJ Tucker yesterday, somewhat surprisingly. And Ty Lue said after the game that he will be in the rotation going forward. How long that will stick, if he has a couple games where he's not very good, makes a lot of rookie mistakes, etc. But I think there are changes that can be made in terms of trying to fit in other guys. I think Amir Coffey is a player who a lot of Clippers fans want to see get minutes because he is more of a two-way presence. He does add that defense. As you said, the Clippers have already been good defensively. But as you play Harden a lot more, maybe those defensive numbers slip a little bit. I think that's why they've been playing PJ Tucker, despite the fact he's a complete zero on offense. But exactly as you said, their offense has not been good. And I think even though Kobe Brown's a rookie, even though Daniel Tice is an older veteran, these are guys who can do a little bit more with the ball in their hands, are a little bit more offensive threats than PJ Tucker, or maybe even some of the guys that the Clippers traded. So I think they are trying to unlock their offense a little bit, just through some changes to the rotation. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is something that will come with time as Harden becomes more accustomed to playing with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in particular, and they develop more of a synergy.
Also, just in general, Kobe Brown is listed at 6'7", 250, and Daniel Tice is 6'8", and you've got a little bit more size here than somebody like a PJ Tucker. And I know that a lot of the identity surrounding the Clippers over the course of these last couple of years has been the switchable wings, going small, but that was with Nick Batum and Robert Covington and guys that were really good at doing that. It might be a little bit different now, and they seems like they might have to adapt, and adding another center in, I think, probably helped. And I know Ivica Zubac is very, very good. I've very much enjoyed his overall game so far this season. He played great against the Nuggets in general, but it is tough sometimes that the Clippers, for as much as they have benefited from going small over the course of these years, maybe just getting back to basics might be pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's something I think they figured out last year when they started the season without a backup center, because the plan was to just play small the entire game, the entire season. And they very quickly learned that doesn't work against a lot of teams. It's also because a lot of their veteran forwards fell off a little bit. Marcus Morris is a guy who was a key piece of their team and became basically unplayable last year. And so they did have to adapt. That's why they traded for Mason Plumlee. And yeah, I mean, I think they still go to the switchable stuff too much. As you said, they've been really good on defense this year. I don't want to criticize them. There are times when they switch way too easily. I think it's a very common nitpick in the modern NBA that guys just are like, oh, we'll switch. It's easy. You don't have to hedge. You don't need to fight to get through screens or whatever. And depending on the personnel, it's not always great. Like putting Norm Powell on a bigger guy, not ideal. Kawhi Leonard, for as amazing a defender as he is, like he was guarding De'Aaron Fox sometimes yesterday. That's not like an ideal matchup for him. The Clippers don't really have guys they can put on Fox. That's one of the weaknesses of their team is point of attack defense against smaller, quicker guards. But again, that's where like having a big man out there to protect the rim. So okay, your perimeter defense gets punctured. Having a big man out there helps a lot compared to just having smaller guys who maybe they do rotate to protect the rim, but is that really going to do anything against De'Aaron Fox, Anthony Edwards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jamal Murray, etc.? I don't know if they're getting bothered by, Norm Powell being at the rim.
Probably not. And then there's just a little bit of an evolution that's going to have to take place, but it is a good evolution. This is something that the Clippers are just going to have to figure out by themselves, and they're going to have to figure out how to blend the 4 Hall of Famers together in different combinations. Just, is there a particular combination that you've liked so far when maybe it's not like when all 4 of those guys are on the floor, but like different lineup styles, lineup combinations with or without Zubac is what makes sense?
Any Russell Westbrook stands who are listening to this, cover your ears. Russell Westbrook is clearly the odd man out of the 4 of them. He's the worst of the 4 of them. And as skeptics, I guess I will charitably say, have been saying since the acquisition happened, his lack of shooting is really tough to put around other stars. He needs the ball in his hands. As a Clipper, he has been willing to play off ball and set screens and play in the short roll, and kind of do stuff to mitigate that. But when push comes to shove, teams are not going to guard him. It just really fouls the spacing up. And as you said, like that can work if you have a stretch big man or if you are playing small and don't have another non-shooter out there. But then your defense really suffers. When the Clippers don't have Ivica Zubac out there, their defense falls off a cliff. He's the best rim protector and rebounder on the team. Playing him with Russell Westbrook makes the offense a lot less effective. I think he does have utility when one of those other guys is out to help carry kind of the load and the usage rate. He is a good guy to bring off the bench in terms of just the energy, the physicality, the ability to get downhill against bench units. He's the odd man out. In terms of more kind of smaller pairings, I would say James Harden and Kawhi Leonard both play very methodically. They're both very slow. They don't like to push the pace. Ty Lue pretty immediately gravitated towards staggering the 2 of them together and then Paul George and Russell Westbrook together. I think that's smart, and I think those pairings have generally worked. But to me, I mean, I think ultimately Terrence Mann should and will be playing over Russell Westbrook. I think the Clippers starting lineup right now should be their best lineup. I think there are times when maybe you want to inject Norm Powell instead of Terrence for a little bit more shooting and scoring. Maybe you even play all 5 of them together for like a really small kind of offensively potent lineup. But I think they need Zoo's rim protection and rebounding. I think they need Terrence's kind of defense and cutting and ability to play with minimal usage. So I think really their starting lineup is probably should be their go-to lineup going forward with, some variations depending on matchups.
There are worse lineups to go to than your starting lineup. So definitely okay with that one. And there are things that as long as that group can be positive, as long as that group can kind of be their bellwether, then they will continue to evolve and it will get better. But we'll see where it goes from here. Last question I have for you. Did you enjoy the group stage of the in-season tournament? Was that something that you, kind of covering the Clippers, but also a fan of the NBA, was it something that you enjoyed?
For the Clippers, no, because they were terrible in it. But in general, I don't have super strong feelings. I wasn't one of the people who's like, wow, Adam Silver really cooked or whatever. But that said, I mean, I do like the idea of it. I didn't see really the harm in it. A lot of times I didn't notice it was an in-season tournament, to be honest, but I think it's something that, as people have pointed out, as the years go along and teams become more adjusted to like the point differential being a thing and teams not being surprised by that, the fact that the courts were different, I honestly think some of the really weird courts threw players off for a little bit just with how bright they were. I think there were times players didn't know where each other were and all that sort of stuff. So I think that I did enjoy it. There were some games that were really awesome. I think some of the stuff with point differential, ensuring that teams kind of play right down to the final whistle, I really do like that. I don't like the complaining about that. Like, if you're getting blown out, just be better. The Clippers were blown out in a couple of them. Like, it is what it is. They got blown out. Like, be better. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but I think honestly, this first run will probably be the worst of them. I anticipate it'll actually be more fun in years to come.
I wonder if, rather than doing a random drawing for the groups going forward, if they just made the groups permanent and said, hey, Nuggets, Clippers, Rockets, like, you're all in the same group year after year after year. And then maybe that kind of is weird from a divisional standpoint. Maybe there's some things that they can figure out, or maybe they just go to divisions at some point. But I kind of like the idea of consistently playing against the same group and saying, hey, this is going to become a rivalry because these games matter and you're playing against the same teams over and over again.
It would also be great for the Nuggets because they own the Clippers. And it would be terrible for the Clippers to be playing in this group year over year. For as long as Jokic is on the Nuggets, I'm pretty sure they will never win the in-season tournament. But it is fun, and I think the Clippers-Nuggets could become a rivalry if it becomes a little bit more even and less one-sided than it has been the past 3 years.
Gotta play Bones Highland, man. Gotta get Bones back on the court. That's the only way to do it.
I wish, honestly, he might play tonight. Norm Powell is questionable with a knee, so for any Nuggets fans, probably not many of you who still are interested in Bones Highland, he actually probably will be playing tonight, so we'll see.
We will see what happens. He is Robert Flom, a writer for 213 Hoops and host of the Lob the Jam the Pod. Thank you so much for hopping on, Robert. Really appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yep, thanks, Ryan.